So Thanksgiving was good. Eli Roth's new slasher movie has recently hit theatres. And if you are a slasher fan, I would recommend this one. Not unlike Scream, Thanksgiving is a whodunit. And while it's not dethroning Scream as king of the mystery slashers anytime soon, it did a pretty good job. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it, well, not until we hit this point in the video. So you're probably getting the gist that I liked Thanksgiving. But what is it exactly that's good about it? Well, the big one is obviously the death scenes. Eli Roth is quite famous for his exceptionally gory horror films. And this one stays true to that, although significantly tamer than the likes of Hostel. There are people being decapitated, cut in half, bludgeoned to death, and that death scene on the trampoline? I won't spoil it, but it was good. And also somebody gets cooked like a turkey. That was interesting. So this movie has the kill scenes nailed down, just like all the coffins are nailed down on all of the victims. The characters were all well acted and they were likeable enough. That being said, they didn't stand out in any memorable way. So I guess you could just say they were serviceable. Now, the actual mystery side of it, I've seen it being done better, but likewise I've seen it being done a lot worse as well. I couldn't say I was sure who the killer was, but it's one of those where when you find out, you're not really surprised. So that's what I liked. What I didn't like though, there was zero suspense in the whole film. You know those scenes where someone is hiding in a room and the killer's in there searching for them? They're usually the most suspenseful moments. But in this film, those scenes just had none at all. It could be that the killer's disguise didn't look all that good. I mean, it didn't look terrible. It just looked okay. But the main reason is that the film lacked in any way a meaningful score. Some slasher movies don't rely on music to add the suspense, such as Scream. Sure, it's definitely present, but it doesn't make or break it. But that's because Ghostface is usually speaking and taunting the victim. But in Thanksgiving, the killer is mostly mute. They do speak towards the end, but for the most part, mute. Which then makes me think of Halloween or Friday the 13th, both of which rely heavily on their respective soundtracks to add that suspense. So that is likely the key culprit. The other thing is, every time the killer is going to attack, it is so predictable. There aren't any fake out scenes on this to keep the audience on edge. And to be honest, the lack of suspense is the only thing I don't like about this film. Which kinda says how good it is. Now this one I think is the most interesting thing about the movie, which is the genre shift, which happens right at the start. The movie opens up with a department store bracing itself for the horrors of Black Friday, and the customers burst through the windows and go absolutely crazy to get all the best deals. There are people getting trampled, one guy gets shoved neck first into a shard of glass, but even as the blood is leaving his neck like a sprinkler system, he's still trying to pick up this microwave oven or waffle maker or whatever it was they were selling. The entire intro is like that scene out of Jingle All the Way, where all the customers go crazy to get their hands on that Turbo Man doll, except with, more blood and death. I mean, someone even gets their scalp ripped off. It's a funny intro, very entertaining, but it sets your expectations for the rest of the film to be the same. After that intro though, it is literally just a normal slasher film. The deaths are over the top, which can lead to a certain amount of comic validity, but it never reaches the comedic heights as it did during the intro. So the movie definitely has an interesting tonal shift, which makes it hard for me to say that this is a good horror movie, but it is still a good film. And you might be thinking maybe horror comedy would be a bit fitting, but it's not comedic enough to be considered a horror comedy. In fact, as I was leaving the cinema, I overheard somebody say if they were to rate it as a horror film, they'd give it a 3 out of 10, but just as a film, a 7 out of 10. And I absolutely agree with them. I couldn't call it a good horror film because the tone shifted that much. And I know you might be thinking, it's just the intro to the film, it's like 10 to 15 minutes, does it really matter? And you would be right, except for the fact that the entire movie revolves around that first 10 to 15 minutes. Everything the killer does is because people went nuts for Turbo Man. So it was such a big part of the film, I couldn't shake the change in tone. And it was an interesting decision because Eli Roth, the director, usually makes horror films that are just so brutally dark. I mean, look at Hostel or The Green Inferno. If you even manage to survive that, you're going to be a prisoner to those mental scars for the rest of your life. So it's interesting that this one was different, and I have no problem with this film not being brutally dark. It's just interesting that they decided to change the tone just after the intro. But like I said, the introduction, the tonal shift doesn't make it a bad movie. In fact, it's a lot of fun to watch. The whole film is very entertaining, and I would highly recommend it for fans of movies like Scream. Now, for the spoilers. It was the sheriff all along, which the movie lets us know right from the start in a very subtle way. The movie opens up in a first-person view of an unknown character. We are looking at the front of a house and all we can hear is breathing. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, it's a massive nod towards Halloween. But as the camera moves towards the door, as it opens, we see that we were seeing through the eyes of the sheriff. So the very subtle hint was in reference to the killer of Halloween, because in that we see through the killer's eyes, looking at the house, walking up to the front door. Then in Thanksgiving, we see through the eyes of who is later revealed to be the killer, walking towards that house, up to that door. And I really want that to be intentional, because if it was, that was so damn clever. The movie also leaves itself wide open for a sequel. The killer is apparently burnt to a crisp, but we see someone fully dressed in firefighter gear, walking away with an axe. Is that the killer? Or could it just be a firefighter with an axe? So overall, Thanksgiving is a good film, just not a solid horror film. You've been watching Good or Bad, and I will see you next time.